Just a minute.
Gets it out of the way.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. So more coming. Tendrin La, Venerable, Snehi, Rachel, Richard said hello to the others. Stephen is still in the mystic mountain monastery there. Summer, hi, Summer. So let's begin with the prayers. Mary Ellen is the host today. Will you put up the prayers, Mary Ellen? Oh, nice. Okay. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create, through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrators, all migrating beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create, through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrating beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create, through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And the next one. By offering this ground, anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon, visualized as a Buddha realm, may all migrators enjoy a pure realm. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release, please send down a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. So when it says in accordance with the, no, we're not dedicating now, yeah. When it says in accordance with the wishes, the needs of those to be tamed, that's the function of the omniscient mind, the Dharmakaya. It knows exactly what people need to hear at any one time. And it sends down a rain of Dharma, so to speak, that is, in whatever form it might be, in the form of emanations, teaching, or the person you bump into in the pharmacy who's gives you a chance to practice patience or something like that. So let's begin also with a little meditation. Hi, Mikhail. Paul has just shown up. Let's sit comfortably with if you can, your legs crossed. I think many of you are sitting in chairs. Spine erect. Place your attention, first of all, on your respiration. Recognize it. And then once it's recognized, you can utilize the mental factor mindfulness to keep it in mind. To the exclusion of everything else. Recognizing when you're breathing in and when you're breathing out. If you're mindful of your breathing and holding that very tightly, there's no room for other thoughts to intercede, so they begin to diminish in their intensity and their frequency. If you still feel you might be controlling the breathing, divert your attention to your heartbeat. See if you can perceive that. That's something that probably is beyond the control of us now. When you're watching your heartbeat, bring your attention back to your breathing again. You'll notice that it's just the natural breathing. Then when your mind is a little clear of other thoughts, having watched the breathing, follow a breath up your nostrils as though it's going to the crown of your head, to your throat, to your heart chakra. Leave your attention around there and just watch your mental consciousness. Pay attention to that. If you're already familiar, you can try to bring back a remembering consciousness of the clear light nature of the mind, or reconstruct an awareness of it by realizing the space between thoughts, focusing on that. Or even when thoughts are present, recognizing that the presence of a thought infers the clear light nature, conventional clear light nature of the mind. The fact that the thought is there means this spaciousness of the mind, clear light nature of the mind, is not obstructing those thoughts' presence. It's not something you're noticing with your eye consciousness. Something you're noticing with your wisdom eye, your mental consciousness. And remember the import of that. This conventional clear light nature of the mind is also called the developmental Buddha nature. The fact that we can develop any and all good qualities, even those that seem out of our reach now. And we can eliminate all our faults, our petty mind, our self-interest, our irritation, especially with others, our anger. We can eliminate ignorance from our mind. We can develop wisdom, renunciation, bodhicitta, and so forth. This is an incredible resource we always have and can go back to when things seem insoluble. And the fact that we can recognize this right now is because we have a life of leisure and endowment, this fortunate moment, so to speak, that's come about because of karma we've created in previous lives, ripened by aspirational prayers, especially the practices of morality and generosity. And that this life that we have right now is not limited to worldly goals of pleasure of the senses, the eight worldly dharmas, power, wealth, position, even how many friends we have, how much affection we have from others. The real utility of this life that we have right now is that we can practice the Dharma and create the causes for future human rebirths with the intention of continuing along the path, developing renunciation, great compassion, bodhicitta, non-dual awareness. Out of an empathy, out of a concern for other sentient beings, not just those who are close, those who are strangers, those who are enemies. All of them have been and will be again, as long as we're in cyclic existence, our friends in other lives. They'll be our mothers, and they have been our mothers numberless times. Thinking rather than just achieving my own nirvana, my own goal, my own welfare, that would be unconscionable, not pronouncing correctly, as all my mothers are still suffering in cyclic existence if I were to just simply retreat into nirvana and leave them behind. I must become a Buddha eventually, certainly higher than I am now, soon, so that I can initially not harm others with, my actions and comments. I can actually benefit them, developing clairvoyance even before omniscience, knowing what other people need, what their real wishes are, what their faults are, and helping them along the way. To do that perfectly, spontaneously, effortlessly, I must become a Buddha. I must achieve omniscience. So with that thought in mind, knowing that the path that leads to omniscience requires the accumulation of merit and wisdom, and that this topic that we're discussing, the Lama Tsongkhapa's famous Illumination of the Intent commentary on Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka, this provides the grist to accumulate merit and wisdom. Therefore, I'm going to listen, think about, contemplate, and meditate during this coming hour and a half, 2 hours, with that goal in mind, to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. I'm going to participate in the class in order to become a Buddha, in order to benefit all living beings. And then bring your attention back to the present. How are we doing? Was anyone able to perceive their heartbeat? Mary Ellen was. That's the only head I see. Paul, yeah, okay, good. Jennifer, were you able? I wasn't sure. Did you put your
Oh,
hand?
sorry. I didn't try. I just focused on the breath.
Oh, okay, that's okay. Yeah. Don, did you hear? Could you perceive your heartbeat? You're muted. You're muted. You have to press the space bar or something. Still muted. Okay, doesn't matter. Put your hand up if you perceived your heartbeat. Oh, Summer, Christian, oh, Violet, okay, good. Mikhail, okay. Snehi? No? Okay. Try sometime. So the idea there is that sometimes when you're watching your breathing, you recognize you're controlling it a little bit right now. And so forth. So to get back to the state where you're, it's just natural there, watch your heartbeat for some time. It's so subtle. You don't have to do anything to create your heartbeat. And in watching that, your breathing becomes, normal, uncontrived, so to speak, again, and you can continue that way. Rachel, you had a thought. Are you out bicycling?
Yes, I'm sorry, Venerable George. I went out to the farmer's market on the bike and I'm almost home.
Oh.
So I could definitely feel my heartbeat, but I couldn't concentrate on it one single pointedly.
That's incredible. So we have people all over the world and on a bike. I think that one time there was someone on a boat, wasn't there? Okay. Okay. So any questions from last week's, anything that you've been wishing you could clear up? Ron, you have a question.
Yes, in Jeffrey's book, on page
Which book?
One-
The Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism?
yeah, this is an old edition.
Right. Okay.
On page 121, the paragraph begins, still compassion observing phenomenon does not observe just sentient beings. My question is further down in the paragraph where it says, are you there?
I am. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm there.
When one determines that beings disintegrate momentarily the existence of a permanent, partless, and independent person is eliminated in one's mind. When I read that independent, I was wondering, is there, when you have the discrimination of an impermanent person, does it also generalize to a wisdom of emptiness of the individual?
No. So what's being referred to here, and if someone is clever, they can tell us what page in Jimpa's text that section is. What is being talked about here is the grossest intellectually formed grasping at a self of persons. So this is not something that we ordinarily do. We don't grasp at the at the person as being this triad. We do grasp at ourselves as being permanent, but not necessarily as being independent or partless. So those three qualities are the attributes in the Vedic system. You could say Hinduism, the Vedas, some of the Vedic schools conceived that the self, the Atma, which did exist, there's our own Atma and the great Atma and so forth, that our Atma, our self, was permanent, partless, and independent. What did he say here? When one determines as beings disintegrate, the existence of a permanent, partless, and independent person is eliminated in one's mind. So it doesn't mean that, what it means is that intellectually formed opinion that you might have had by studying tenets, maybe there's something similar in Christianity, that the soul is another way of translating Atma, right? Do you know that? Atma, self or soul. We do have a self, conventional self, but the self that we think of is intertwined with the appearance of an inherently existent self, right? So when we talk, there's different meanings of Atma according to or self according to the context. So when one determines that beings disintegrate momentarily, if you have a realization of subtle impermanence, at that point, there's no chance that you can have the idea of a permanent, partless, and independent person, because you realize the person is not permanent, right? You've realized impermanence. That's the point. Ron, you have to unmute. Ron, you're muted.
The thing about an independent person is put in the same paragraph, in the same line as a person who is impermanent.
Right.
Did I say that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So the implication is that this is talking about this triad of qualities that come about from studying let's say the Vedic tenets, maybe Samkhya or whatever, that the person is permanent, partless, and independent. So all of those come as a package. If you eliminate one of them, the package is disintegrated, right? That's the point, that there's no longer a thought, there's no longer a doubt that there might be a permanent, partless, and independent person, because permanent is the person is permanent has been eliminated. Yeah, I also, when I read that, I had similar, you have to think about it a bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just kind of getting from that if I see a person as impermanent, I also realize that there's no inherently existent person.
No, No, that's
That's the part I'm stuck on.
no.
Yeah.
This is not talking because the permanent, partless, and independent person is not talking about an inherently existent person. This is much, much grosser
Right. Yeah.
conception of the self. Okay. Summer, what are you thanking us for? There's a note up that says Summer says thanks.
Oh, no, I was asking what book you guys were referring to.
Oh, okay. Someone gave you.
I didn't catch the title,
Okay.
so I was just asking the title.
That's Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism. Part of that book is Jeffrey Hopkins' translation of the first 5 chapters of Illumination of the Intention, or Gompa Rapsel. So that's an alternative translation that if you're eager to have, to read Jeffrey's translation and Thupten Jinpa's translation, you can follow, say, oh, they're a little bit different. And then they really can open up some avenues, because Jeffrey is sometimes spot on, sometimes Jinpa is spot on. Sean, how are you? What you have a thought, question?
So did you just say that being independent, partless, and I can't remember the other one.
Permanent, partless, and independent?
That's not what they're referring to as inherently existing?
No, that's not talking about inherent existence. In fact, this is talking about compassion, observing phenomena. Remember the 3 kinds of compassion. Compassion observing mere sentient beings, where they're not qualified in any other way than that they're suffering. Compassion observing phenomena means still observing sentient beings that are suffering, but having realized impermanence, for instance, those sentient beings are qualified by being impermanent. And the fact that they themselves grasp at themselves as being permanent, usually people will say, oh no, of course I'm not permanent, but we have an inherent mind, like the mind that grasps at inherent existence. We have a natural innate mind that grasps at things as being permanent, because they don't appear to change moment by moment. So once you have realized subtle impermanence, have a realization of that, it doesn't have to be with single pointed concentration, but you have an insight into that. You have you correctly understand that. You can have this deeper kind of compassion when you observe sentient beings, as you recognize that they are suffering even more because they grasp at themselves as being permanent. They want to get things, forgetting about the fact that the things that they get, will change, that they'll lose them, that they will die, and so forth. That's the point here. This permanent, partless, and independent has nothing to do with inherent existence.
Well, so what is the definition of inherent existence then?
Oh, come on. Yeah, we're talking about this. That's a topic of the whole book.
Well, I know, but I thought
You want to, in a nutshell, you want the whole book right now. Okay? So inherent existence is the subtle, most innate grasping of the mind. That is to say, we have natural kind of klesha, afflictions, right? We have different kinds of ignorance. The most subtle kinds of ignorance is the mind that believes that phenomena exist the way that they appear, in the sense that they are findable in their parts, like my tree outside. I don't know if you can see, you can't see the reflection of can you see in my glasses the reflection of the trees out my window? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Green trees. So, because of karma, because of my karma collected from beginningless time, and because of my continued intensifying all the time, believing that phenomena that appear to me due to karma exist the way that they appear. The way that they appear is that they appear to be existing from their own side. Another way of saying that is that they appear to be findable in their parts, that there's something really there. That kind of appearance is the appearance of inherent existence, that something really exists the way it appears. We can also call that true existence. Some of the slightly lower schools, like the Svatantrika Madhyamaka, rather than the Prasangika Madhyamaka, they say that phenomena are inherently existent, but they're not truly existent. There's a slight difference. So all of this will come later.
But as far as like a scientist that understands, like if I were to zoom in with a microscope, I'm going to see things that I don't see with my normal perception. Like it's going to start breaking apart.
Yeah, that's not.
You're going to get into space, and
that's not inherent existence. That's still grasping at inherent existence. Inherent existence is a hypothetical existence. It doesn't exist.
right.
But our mind, because our minds, what appears to us appears to be inherently existent. And why does it do that? Because of imprints from beginningless time, that we've always followed this. We've always believed this. That is what we call svabhava, nature. Like in if you do tantric sadhanas, you say Om Svabhava Shuddha Sarva Dharma Svabhava Shuddho Ahang, right? You know that mantra? Some of you? Jennifer, do you say that mantra? Paul, if you do Guya, Paul has written, great expositions about Guya Samadra Tantra. All of the tantras say Om Svabhava Shuddha Sarva Dharma. What that means is Sarva Dharma means all phenomena. Svabhava Shuddha means they are free of, or they're purified of svabhava. Means they are empty of inherent existence. Om Svabhava Shuddha Sarva Dharma. Svabhava Shuddha Aham. Aham means I. I also, not only outer phenomena are empty of inherent existence, they're free of this svabhava nature that appears to us, but also I am free of that. Rachel's off her bike. Great. Okay. So more coming, Sean. Are you still there? Yeah, Sean. Okay. So before we start, any last question? Okay, we're gonna go. So we're around page 60, if I remember. And just as a little reminder, so just a little bit before this, it says the purpose of establishing the system of the second Buddha, Nagarjuna, and so on. That means not just the system that was explained by Nagarjuna, but by Arya Deva and Bhavaviveka and Chandrakirti and so forth, Shantarakshita, Kamalashila. That's the so on. The purpose of establishing the system of the second Buddha, Nagarjuna, and so on by means of study and critical reflection is to ensure that we find a deep conviction. Remember, we talked about this before. If you haven't studied and thought about the subjects and analyze them and come to some conviction, that means belief, correct belief. right? If you haven't reached that, we cannot, the purpose of establishing the system of the second Buddha, Nagarjuna, and so on, by means of study and critical reflection, is to ensure that we find a deep conviction in the method of practicing the perfect path, so that we cannot be led astray by deceptive false paths. As I mentioned, Jeffrey translates that as, we say tarnang, which means sort of like something that looks like a path, but is not really a path. Like someone says, if you stand on one leg, you'll burn up all your karma. If you stand, in the certain Hindu traditions, what do they call it? The 10 fires, is that right? The fire, you have a fire in front, fire to the right, fire to the left, fire to the back, flames, the sun above, and you're sitting on embers. And they say that this will purify all your karma, and you will reach, moksha, which is, in the Hindu tradition, they don't use the word nirvana so much. Moksha means kind of liberation. So those would be considered, similitudes of paths, or, what looks like a path, but is not deceptive false paths. Those engaged in study and reflection who, however much they engage in the study of the treatises of the systems of the great charioteers, never find ascertainment, I mean certainty, with respect to their own personal practice, are clearly not approaching their study and reflection in an effective manner. So there's probably most of us, just, we haven't reached certainty about, rebirth and, all of these other things either. So we haven't studied and reflected, contemplated in the right way. As such, even were they to strive hard in the great vehicle, they would fail to extract its value. So, meaning us, we need to think about the teachings. Therefore, we must strive to understand how to traverse the stages of the path. Hopkins says you should strive to know the stages of progress on the path. So, where do we know that from? We know that from the Lan Rim. If you've studied in the Gelugpa tradition, we talk of the Lam Rim. Lam means path, Rim means stages. So although Nagarjuna explains partial aspects of the path in numerous texts, 3 treatises present the overall body of the path, three of his treatises present the overall body of the path, both in terms of the profound, that means about the wisdom side, emptiness, and the vast or extensive, that means the explanation of the Bodhisattva's deeds dealing with conventional reality. When we say profound and vast, or profound and extensive, that sort of covers all of the teachings of the Buddha. As for how the precious garland presents the path, remember, if you like, this is Jeffrey Hopkins' translation of Precious Garland, if you haven't already seen that. As to how the Precious Garland presents the path, so this is Nagarjuna's text. So we said these 3 treatises, Precious Garland is one of them. Lines such as, the roots of this are an awakening mind, and other lines that say, all the practices preceded by compassion were already cited above. So in Jeffrey Hopkins' text, he doesn't just say that, he gives the actual quotation. So it says, the first part where it says, the roots of this are an awakening mind, that's talking about this stanza. If you in the world wish to gain highest enlightenment, its roots are bodhicitta, altruistic aspiration to enlightenment, firm like Mount Meru, the king of mountains, compassion reaching in all directions, and wisdom which relies not on duality. So non-dual wisdom. That was a stanza that we went over before, translated slightly differently by Jimpa, but Jimpa just, as Lama Tsongkhapa expects you to remember these things, Jimpa is also expecting you to remember. Jeffrey Hoppe is a little more generous, reminding you that the whole thing. Then the second thing says, all the practices preceded by compassion. That's another verse in the Precious Garland that says, who with intelligence, what do we say in the world? Who with a brain would deride, criticize deeds motivated by compassion and the stainless wisdom as is taught in the Mahayana. So these are these quotations from Precious Garland. So as for how the Precious Garland presents the path, these things were already cited above. So he talks about the practices of the bodhisattvas, developing compassion, non-dual awareness, bodhicitta. He talks about the 6 perfections and so forth. In the same work, it says, in the Precious Garland, it says, here to present in brief the qualities of the bodhisattva. They are, well, I just read this the last time. Here to present in brief the qualities of the bodhisattva. They are generosity, right? What would we say, another way of saying generosity? Giving, dana, right? Dana, we talk about the dana paramita, the perfection of giving or the perfection of generosity. How else do people translate that? Generosity, giving, nothing else that morality or ethics, shila, that means the shila paramita. Shila, not like the Australians. Is there any Australian here? I remember reading when I was teaching Lama Osel some Australian novels, and the Australians men often referred to pretty girls as Sheilas. Not that Sheila, not S-H-E-E-L-A, it's S-H-I-L-A. So perfection of morality or ethics, forbearance, or you can translate it as patience. That's often how we translate it. Diligence, Thupten Jinpa says, which we can say effort or joyous effort or, joyous perseverance. Meditative absorption, that's dhyana. That's sometimes just called concentration, perfection of concentration. Wisdom, which we call prajna, sharab. Compassion, and so on. Here to present in brief the qualities of the bodhisattva. They are, it's talking about the 6 perfections: generosity, morality, forbearance, diligence, meditative absorption, wisdom, as well as compassion. And then he says, generosity. What is generosity? What is giving? Thupten Jinpa says, generosity is the utter giving up of self-interest. So there's a little, Jeffrey Hopkins translates it as giving is to give away completely. So the difference here is Thupten Jinpa takes the text. The text actually says wrong nor means wealth or possessions. But Thupten Jinpa takes it as wrong dun, like one's self-interest, like when we talk about self, one's own aim or so forth. He may have some reason from some commentary by his gurus to say that, but the text, all of the Tibetan texts, and even the Sanskrit say giving up one's wealth. So what is generosity? It is to give away completely all one's wealth. That's more precise rather than giving up one's interest. Morality refers to working for others' welfare. Jeffrey says ethics is to help others. And we know what morality or ethics is. So those of you who might have heard, I gave a talk on the threefold Mahayana morality. So that's in Reno, Nevada, some weeks ago. You can find up on the website that Doris made, Gaylong YouTube channel. Usually ethics means, or morality means, abstaining from negative actions. But in the Mahayana, we talk about three kinds of ethics, three kinds of morality: abstaining from negative actions, collecting virtuous dharmas, which includes collecting virtuous karma and other practices, and benefiting sentient beings. So here, Nagarjuna is saying ethics is to help others. That's kind of like the third kind of ethics. Usually, when we get to the first bhumi in our book, which will be very soon, the first paramita, the first bhumi, is one it is able to practice the perfection of giving, or perfection of generosity, and he talks about these three kinds. Okay, but anyway, here in Nagarjuna's text, in the Precious Garland, it just says morality refers to working for others' welfare, or ethics is to help others. Forbearance or patience is to relinquish hostility, or to forsake anger, you can say. Meditative absorption or concentration is, what does it say? Meditative is one-pointedness with no afflictions. Or Jeffrey says, the same verse, just translating a different way. Concentration is unafflicted one-pointedness. So when you talk about the six perfections, when you talk about concentration, it just doesn't mean, just having a single-pointed mind. It means the fact that the mind is not afflicted by delusions coming up, sort of diverting you from the object, right? Wisdom is to establish the meaning of truth. Or Jeffrey says, wisdom is to ascertain the meaning of the truths. That would include two, right? Conventional truth and ultimate truth. Compassion is an intelligence that cares for all beings equally, as if they were all the same. Jeffrey translates, compassion is a mind that savors only mercy and love for all sentient beings. In his translation of Precious Garland, Jeffrey translates it a little bit different. Compassion is a mind having the one savor of mercy for all sentient beings. So savor is what, he says all equally. We say the one savor, the one taste. The way that you treat sentient beings is all the same. You treat them all with the same taste of, or the same savor of mercy or compassion. Okay, makes sense? Together? So then the text continues. Generosity brings resources, morality, happiness, forbearance or patience, luster, diligence, majesty. Meditative absorption brings tranquility, and wisdom brings release. And all aims are realized with a compassionate heart. So what is this talking about? This is a very famous verse. Usually people just, you may have heard before just the first part of it. So to read the first part, from giving arises wealth, or from giving wealth. That means as a result of generosity or giving, you create the karma to receive wealth in the future. That's why the Buddha taught about charity, even at the beginning, even before teaching about morality, because in order to have the cooperative conditions in the future, to not have to work all the time, to have the resources and wealth, you practice now generosity so that you will receive in the future, right? Generosity brings resources. The second part of it is also generally known. Morality brings happiness, or from ethics, happiness. So what does that mean? When you talk about the sixth perfection, when we talk about the perfect human rebirth, right? What are the causes of perfect human rebirth? Do you remember, anyone? Someone put their hand up? Nadine, Nadine, what are the causes of perfect human rebirth?
Morality or ethics, and prayers, wishing prayers to be reborn as a human being.
Morality, prayers, and what else?
I know only these two.
No. Usually it says morality, charity, and pure prayers. So what that means is to have a perfect human rebirth, to be born as a human, the main cause is morality, because by practicing morality, abstaining from negativity, helping others, one creates the karma to be born as a human. But being human is not the whole essence of having a perfect human rebirth, right? You need to have resources so that you're not a beggar and under the influence of others. So you need to practice charity. And to bring those together, you need, for them to ripen together, aspirational prayers. May I be able to benefit other beings in the future. May I be born as a human. Like we often, in our dedication prayers, we make these kind of aspirations. So generosity brings resources. Morality brings happiness. What that means is by practicing morality, you create the causes to have pleasure, but to be, or also to be born in pleasant states, not to be born in the lower realms of animal, hungry ghost, and hell realm, and so forth. Forbearance brings luster. Usually what we say is good appearance. Sometimes people say good complexion. It's not the sort of like, by practicing patience, we'll say, if you're impatient, if you're angry, how do you look? Maybe your face is red and, you don't look good to others. So sometimes I've had lamas say, if the lamas, when they see you, if you don't look appealing to them, that's because you've practiced anger in the past. You haven't practiced patience. The cause of being attractive, to have, what did it say? Jeffrey says, from patience, a good appearance is, the cause of that good appearance is the practice of patience. Or as Jimpa says here, luster. Diligence brings majesty, or in other words, from effort, from effort in virtue, brilliance. when he says majesty. So, one looks majestic, or, not just brilliant, not like you're shining, but you stand out as, maybe you could say charisma in some sense. As you practice perseverance, you are able in the future to achieve things, and that shows in your, I don't know, what do we say, your appearance, your not just good appearance in being attractive or unattractive, but your appearance, your charisma, how people sense you, majestic. Meditative absorption brings tranquility. Jeffrey says, from concentration, peace. And wisdom brings release, or from wisdom, liberation. From compassion, and all aims are realized with a compassionate heart. Jeffrey translates more literally, from compassion, all aims are achieved. So these are quotations from the Precious Garland, indicating, the teachings that Nagarjuna gave in general about stages of the path. Okay. Through simultaneous perfection of all 7 of these, the 6 perfections plus compassion, without exception, one attains lordship of the world itself, the sphere of inconceivable gnosis. One attains lordship of the world itself. Jeffrey translates a little more simply, from the simultaneous perfection of all those 7, from the simultaneous perfection of all those 7 is attained the sphere of inconceivable wisdom. Chimpa says inconceivable gnosis, the protectorship of the world. He says lordship of the world. Chimpa says lordship, the protectorship of the world. So that means one is in a position, by practicing the 6 perfections along with compassion, to be protector of the world, to bring about, to alleviate the suffering of others, to protect them, and so forth. So Jimpa continues, the text here identifies the 6 perfections and explains their benefits as well, as we just said. It also outlines how to train in them with the complementary factor of compassion. So that's how to train in them. Is not mentioned here, but in the Precious Garland, if you read those sections, it explains how to train in the 6 perfections. In this way, Nagarjuna teaches us how the awakening mind, bodhicitta, the basis of the bodhisattva deeds. So in other words, in order to practice the bodhisattva deeds, you have to do it on the basis of bodhicitta, right? Awakening mind. In this way, Nagarjuna teaches us how the awakening mind, the basis of bodhisattva deeds, comes first, and how through these deeds we traverse the 10 grounds of a bodhisattva. Make sense? So we can practice similitudes, if you want, of the 6 perfections now, even if we don't have bodhicitta. We can practice generosity and morality and patience, perseverance, concentration, wisdom. We can call them that, but in order to practice the bodhisattva deeds, they have to be preceded by bodhicitta. So that's your motivation for practicing them. In his praise to the ultimate expanse, this is another text by Nagarjuna. It's one of his praises. The Dharmadhatu Stotra. There are a collection of praises that Nagarjuna wrote. Besides some of his famous texts are called the 6 collections of reasoning. He wrote also, I'm not sure if there was, what is it, Paul? Were there 6 collections of praises?
4 usually.
Four collections of praises. So one of them is this Dharma Dhatu Stotra, or Jeffrey translates praise of the element of qualities. So Jeffrey Jimpa says in his praise to the ultimate expanse 2, Nagarjuna speaks of generating the awakening mind, generating bodhicitta, on the basis of going for refuge. So some different traditions say you don't have to go to refuge, generally you have to have refuge. You have to be in the sphere of the Buddha in order to generate bodhicitta, right? So on the basis of going for refuge, Nagarjuna speaks of generating bodhicitta on the basis of going for refuge, how the 10 perfections enhance the natural sphere. So what are the 10 perfections? I thought we were talking about 6 perfections. Stephen, do you know what the 10 perfections are?
Well, there's, thank you, Venerable George. There's the first 6 that we were just talking about.
Right.
Then there's prayer, power, and exalted wisdom.
That's 3.
Yeah, and
Yeah, skill and means.
Method.
oh, right. Okay, thank you.
Skillful means. Yeah. So when we talk about the 6 perfections, those are generally explained on the first 6 bhumis. One has special practice of those perfections. And on the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis, one has further perfections, the perfection of prayer and, so forth. So, so how the 10 perfections enhance the natural sphere. Here, the natural sphere is, Jeffrey translates, the enhancement of one's lineage through the 10 perfections. So what does that mean when you talk about, here he translates natural sphere as dhatu. So it's sometimes that means one's lineage. When we talk about, when you develop great compassion, you awaken the Mahayana lineage. So what does lineage mean? That means sort of like you enter into, you haven't entered into the Mahayana lineage yet. You're not yet a bodhisattva, but you've awakened the Mahayana lineage. Lineage kind of means, like you're part of the family, right? So how the 10 perfections enhance the natural sphere, or as Jeffrey says, enhances one's lineage. You enhance your Mahayana lineage, so to speak. And he presents the 10 bodhisattva grounds as well. Okay, so we just talked about the 10 bodhisattva grounds. The first ground, it starts from the path of seeing and so forth, up till the 10th ground, which is just before achieving Buddhahood or enlightenment. In elaborating on this rough summary of the body of the path, Nagarjuna speaks in his compendium of sutras about how finding a life of leisure and opportunity, as well as finding faith in the teachings, are difficult, and how, compared to these, generating of the awakening mind is even more difficult to achieve. So what is he saying? What is the compendium of sutras? Has anyone heard the compendium of sutras? I think, I'm not sure we mentioned before. Christian, you're nodding. You have to answer. What is the compendium of sutras?
Sutra Samuchaya.
Sutra Samuchaya, all right. So what is that?
It's just a whole bunch of recommendations about how to behave, I think. I tried to look for the book for a translation of it, but I wasn't successful.
Nor I. So Sutra Samachaya was a text composed by Nagarjuna. And in it, he has a collection or compendium, or you could say anthology, of quotations from Mahayana sutras. So remember the situation. Nagarjuna came maybe 200 years before Christ, maybe 100 years before Christ, around that time, when the Mahayana was almost, not so known in the world. What had been prominent from the passing away of the Buddha 2,500 years ago was the Hinayana path. One of which today the most famous remnant of the Hinayana path is what we call the Theravada. That's only one portion of the many Hinayana schools that existed. When Nagarjuna began his quest or his enterprise to revivify, to open up the Mahayana path again, he gave quotations from Mahayana sutras that were not well known. And he put them together in this text called the Sutra Samuchaya. So very, very famous. I remember reading many years ago, a text by some Western scholar that had some quotes from those Mahayana sutras. There was a scholar, I think he's German, Bhikshu Pasadika, who's actually a German scholar. Do you know, Kristen? You're nodding your head.
I ran into that name quite a few times, and I did some searches on that person. Yeah,
I can't remember his name. Eckhart, I think he's actually a German man who became a bhikshu and a great scholar, and he did a lot of work on the Sutra Samuchaya. If anyone can find he was meant to translate into English the whole thing, and he had translated parts in a journal in German, but I haven't been able to find it. But anyway, you can find in this is a text I might have mentioned before. Can you read that? No? It says, Masters of Wisdom, Writings of the Buddhist Master Nagarjuna by Christian Lindner, Lindtner. So Christian Lindner had written another, sort of the previous text that he written was called Nagarjunayana, which had, translations and excerpts from many of the texts of Nagarjuna. Do you remember that, Paul? We used to get in Dharamsala, the Motilal Banarsidass version. Later, not wisdom publications, what is it called? Dharma publications out in California asked him to revise it. So this is sort of like the revised thing. And in here, he has some of the important points of the Sutra Samuchaya in there. So Nagarjuna speaks in his Compendium of Sutras, Sutra Samuchaya, about how finding a life of leisure and opportunity, as well as finding faith in the teachings, are difficult. Let me just see here. So actually what it says in the Sutra Samuchaya, the actual thing that we call life of leisure and endowment, right? Or leisure and opportunity. We say perfect human rebirth. Tibetan says Del Jor. The Sanskrit that Nagarjuna wrote wasn't that. It was talking about favorable circumstances. So what that is, the Skana Sampada, Shana, Kshana. I can pronounce correctly. How would you pronounce Means moment. How do you say in Sanskrit, Paul?
Yeah, just Shana.
Shana, Shana. The little K at the beginning.
Yeah.
So what that means is sampada means exceptional or auspicious. So that's what we call in Tibetan Buddhism, they translate it as daljor, leisure and endowment, or leisure and opportunity. What it means is, it makes a lot of sense. This life that we have now is a favorable moment. Like when sometimes we talk about this life of leisure and endowment is just last a moment. Have you ever heard that? That means, it's as though in the vast number of lives from beginningless time, we've got this one instant when everything becomes clear. We've got all of the things that we need. So that's actually a favorable circumstance or favorable moment is extremely rare. So that's the origin of all of our reference. One of the references to perfect human rebirth. It's not as though Lama Tsongkhapa made that up or Atisha made that up. This is what the Buddha taught in some of his sutras, in the quotation in the Sutra Samuccaya that Nagarjuna mentions. So the Buddha talked about how rare it was to have this opportune moment like we have right now that we mentioned in our motivation at the beginning, remember? As well as, as well as it's so difficult to find faith in the teachings. So even you were born in a fortunate moment like this, it's very rare to have real faith in the teachings so that you actually get into it, you actually do it. Without faith, it just becomes like an intellectual enterprise. And how, also difficult, compared to these, generating the awakening mind is even more difficult to achieve. So perfect human rebirth is hard to find in this fortunate moment. Faith is very, very hard to find. And generating bodhicitta is even more difficult to achieve. He also provides extensive explanations of topics such as how attaining great compassion for sentient beings is difficult, how compared to all the things, so we talked about bodhicitta before, but it says how attaining great compassion for sentient beings is difficult, how compared to all the things mentioned earlier, it is even more difficult to achieve the elimination of karmic obscurations or karmic obscuration born of injuring a bodhisattva, how it's difficult to eliminate the thought of disparaging them, the elimination of the acts of Mara, demonic actions, and the elimination of the deed of abandoning the sublime Dharma. So when we talk about the difficulty of finding a perfect human rebirth, that was only one of the many things that the Buddha mentioned were difficult to achieve, to attain, to find. Faith in the teachings, generating bodhicitta. Also, how attaining great compassion for sentient beings is difficult. How compared to all the things mentioned earlier, it is even more difficult to achieve the elimination of the karmic obscurations born of injuring a bodhisattva. So what is that talking about? Does that mean like beating up a bodhisattva? What do you think? Injuring a bodhisattva. Let's see. Usually when we talk about, I think Jeffrey translates it more in a more traditional way. Where is it? Sorry. He presents the difficulty of attaining great compassion for sentient beings, and the still greater difficulty, greater one, of gaining the means of abandoning karmic obscurations. What did he call here? Karmic obscurations arising from criticizing bodhisattvas. So when it says injuring bodhisattvas here, what it means, it doesn't mean like when you talk about the 5 acts of immediate retribution, injuring, drawing blood for a Buddha, like hurting them in some way. Injuring here means criticizing. That's how you injure a bodhisattva. Of course, if you injure them, if you shoot them or beat them or something, but mainly it's talking about criticizing bodhisattvas. So that's why it's said in many, many Lanrim texts, as we don't have clairvoyance to know the mind of others, we shouldn't criticize anyone, because if the person we criticize is a bodhisattva, we create incredible karmic obscurations in our mind. So compared to all the things mentioned, it is even more difficult to achieve the elimination of karmic obscurations born of injuring a bodhisattva, criticizing a bodhisattva, elimination of the thought disparaging them. So that also, almost sounds like the same thing, right? Disparaging them means in your own mind, thinking they're nothing, not necessarily criticizing them to their face or criticizing them to others, just sort of in your own mind, thinking lowly of them. Or as Jeffrey translates, the thought to despise bodhisattvas. When you despise them, you can't stand them, right? Those kinds of thoughts, criticizing them, despising bodhisattvas, create incredible karmic obscurations. The elimination of the acts of Mara. So Jeffrey translates demonic activities. Generally, what that means is activities that are done under the influence of your own Mara. It doesn't necessarily, there are different kinds of Maras, right? The Mara of the aggregates, the Mara of death and so forth, the Mara who is the son of the gods, like external demons that might cause you to do things. But when we talk about the main Mara is our own delusions. So demonic activities means, under the influence of your delusions, great attachment, stealing or engaging in sexual misconduct out of attachment, injuring out of others, killing others out of anger, like lying and so forth. I don't know. Maybe you could say, stealing documents from the government. I don't want to be too political here. All of these would be called demonic activities. Elimination of the acts of Mara, and elimination of the deed of abandoning the sublime Dharma, the holy Dharma. So when we talk about Dharma, Dharma has many different meanings, but when we talk about the Dharma that the Buddha taught, we call it the Sad Dharma, or he calls the sublime Dharma. Generally we say the holy Dharma, right? Like the Saddharma Pundarika is the name of one of the famous sutra. The white, was it the white lotus of the sublime Dharma, of the holy Dharma? So abandoning the holy Dharma, what does that mean? That means not, finding some teaching that the Buddha gave as difficult and then thinking, I don't have to do this, this is not, useful and so forth, giving it up, that's called abandoning the Dharma. So as Mahayanas, as proto-Mahayanas, as Mahayana wannabes, we might criticize the Hinayana teachings, ethics of the bhikshus, or the vows and so forth. Oh, I don't need that, or something. That would be abandoning the Dharma. Or as a Theravadan, to think, oh, the Mahayana is just a sky flower, something that's imagined but doesn't really exist. There's nothing there. That's also abandoning the Dharma. Or criticizing, like thinking that the teachings of other traditions, even in the Tibetan tradition, the Kargyus are crazy, or the Sakyas or the Gelugpas are crazy. This is in not following those advices, which are, all getting to the same point, but maybe different, having to be understood differently. That's also can be called abandoning of the Dharma. So that's one of the great, greatest kind of karmic obscurations one can have. Very, very difficult to eliminate. Now, before Sean, I think, where is she? Rachel, is Rachel still here? Oh, Rachel, you had your hand up before, or did you have a question?
Yeah, I thought you were asking about the criticism, and I was just gonna kind of put the emphasis on, if you criticize a bodhisattva and other people hear it, then they don't have the faith in the bodhisattva.
Right, that's one
seemed
thing,
like
right?
that was part. So
Right,
because so that is that the difference between the criticizing and this despairing, that other people are hearing it, or is it
that can be part of it, I think.
something?
So yeah, besides the fact that you denigrate in front of others the bodhisattva, and people lose faith in them, oh, look at shabby clothes that they're wearing, they don't take care of themselves, they're only helping others, they're only helping the animals or whatever. So people lose faith in them, but also just by your creating that thought, that verbal action, you create incredible obscuration in your own mind, the tendency to criticize again in the future, and so forth. Despising the bodhisattvas also is like despising the Dharma. When we talk about abandoning the Dharma, thinking, oh, that's not important, I don't need to do that. That's kind of like despising the Dharma, right? Abandoning the Dharma. So here, despising the bodhisattvas, thinking them as low, not having regard for their activities, despising their activities, not praising them, not aspiring to be like them. So they're both in that category. Sean, your thought.
So how would the abandoning the Dharma be different from like the Buddha? I thought the Buddha said, like, if to test his teachings, and if you find that they don't apply to you, to let it go. So how is that?
I don't know what the Buddha said. The Buddha said, you should not accept my teachings out of faith alone. You should examine them. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't accept them, but you shouldn't accept them out of faith alone. You should examine them in the same way that you examine gold. We don't probably, I don't know if anyone here is in the gold market. I don't know. In the old days, you walk down the alley in Lhasa or something, or in India, and someone says, "Psst, here's a piece of gold. I give it to you for, this or that, for that donkey or something." And, and maybe it's not gold. There are a lot of scams happening today, right? So you have to investigate the teachings. First, you would rub the gold with a stone to see if the color is consistent. You would cut it to see if there's a piece of lead in the middle. Maybe there's a little layer of gold on the top, but inside is all lead. You would melt it. What are the other ones, Paul? Rubbing.
Yeah, it's
cutting,
usually, I think,
melting,
scorching. I think.
Scorching, yeah, sort of like, when if you put some copper in a flame, you get a certain kind of green color or something. Maybe we'd call that spectral analysis today. So you have to check the teachings in various ways to develop conviction, not just faith. The Buddha didn't say you shouldn't believe what I say. He said you shouldn't believe what I say out of faith alone. You should check it. That's the point. Jennifer.
Yes, thank you, Venerable George. From a practical sense regarding criticizing others, I'm thinking of a couple of instances. For instance, let's say that someone is acting with the appearance of, creating harm to others, or doing something against, their bodhisattva vows, or, things like that. How do we skillfully address that while avoiding criticism? And then a second part of this is, especially if we're dealing with a guru who we are committed to see as a Buddha, like His Holiness has said with Retting Rinpoche. So when he's on his meditation cushion, he sees, him as a Buddha, but then in conventional reality, he's critical of his actions. And so I'm wondering if you could offer a little bit of practical nuance to how we can work with criticism and action in mind.
Nuance, yeah. I'm not
Thank
very
you.
good at nuance, but I'll try. So last part of what Jennifer was saying was, maybe some of you don't know this. His Holiness, when His Holiness was young, before he was enthroned and everything, he had a regent. One of the regents was Retting Rinpoche, and Retting Rinpoche, was criticized by others. Supposedly there were some scandals. Who knows whether he actually did the things that he was accused of, maybe plotting to have people murdered or stealing or something like this. But anyway, he was commonly criticized. But he was the Dalai Lama's regent, which meant he was one of the people that influenced the Dalai Lama's education and so forth. So the Dalai Lama, as Jennifer said, has said that while in meditation, when he thought of Retting Rinpoche, he saw him as a, fully enlightened Buddha, omniscient mind, had no faults. But with regard to the faults that people attributed to him, he would say, you shouldn't do like that. You shouldn't steal. If you're a monk, you shouldn't steal. You shouldn't plot to harm others, or so forth. So there's no contradiction there. If you see someone who is doing actions that are perceived by others as injurious, you can say, you shouldn't act that way. Not necessarily, you can say that to the person, or you can say that to others. You should advise them, don't act like, so-and-so. Whereas in your mind, you would still try to see them with compassion and so forth. Difficult today when you talk about politicians and so forth, especially if you're in this polarized political arena today. You might want to say someone is totally bad and, so forth and so on, but they are the object of our compassion and so forth. So in terms of, making statements, one can say certain actions are bad. You shouldn't steal government documents. You shouldn't, you shouldn't kill. You shouldn't engage in sexual misconduct. So with a compassionate mind, you can advise others who are engaging in bad activity. You can, with a compassionate mind, you can say, that's not right, you shouldn't do that, and so forth. Criticizing, having a critical mind is very dangerous. Criticizing, just in general to others, saying that person is bad. The example that's given about, criticizing is that you don't know who others, unless you have clairvoyance, you don't know the mind of another person. So you may be criticizing a bodhisattva and creating this incredible karmic obscuration in your mind. The example that's given is sometimes in India, what do you call it? The bandits, what were they called? Anyway, can't remember the name. They would dig a pit in the ground and put embers, burning fire below, and then cover the top with maybe some string and put straw on it, kind of like in these movies, like traps that you trap the guys are chasing you. You build some kind of thing for them to fall into that have spikes sticking up or something like this. Maybe you've seen some of those movies. So it's said that you don't know. So as you're walking along, it looks just like grass, and you can fall into it and fall into these burning embers at the bottom. So that's an example of if you don't know you don't know the state of a person's mind, you don't know who they are, criticizing them can create these incredible karmic obscurations if they're a good person, or especially if they're a bodhisattva. So we should be very cautious about criticizing. And if we advise others about their behavior, to do it out of compassion and not make blanket criticisms of all of their activities. Does that help a little?
Yes, thank you. And it also reminds me of like if we're trying to cultivate pure view, I remember receiving teachings like try to have discernment at the same time. And so I wonder if there can be a distinction between criticism and discernment. They maybe are similar in terms of how we're trying to apply wisdom, but maybe the motivation with discernment is more out of compassion. Would you?
What kind of discernment are you talking about?
Oh, like I'm thinking, like for instance, with the Vajrasattva, when you have the five empowering deities, blessing Vajrasattva, Akshobhya is on the crown of the head, and Akshobhya is representative of discernment. And so, yeah, I'm trying to elaborate on that.
Okay, I'm not sure how that comes into criticism. Why don't you send me an email? And
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this list of things that are difficult in this text, in Christian Littner's translation, he doesn't translate the Sutra Samachaya, but he talks about a list of things. So I'll just mention some of them. So the coming of the Buddha is most rarely met with, So when we talk about the perfect human rebirth, one of the things is that, the Buddha has come into the world. So most of the world systems, Buddha has not turned the wheel of Dharma there. It's only at certain times. So it's very rare to meet the coming of a Buddha, the arisal of a Buddha. That's one. I think there are 13 of these. Birth of a human being is most rarely met with. So even to be born as a human, let alone a perfect human rebirth, very rare. The favorable circumstances, or this favorable moment, that means a life of leisure and endowment, is rarely met with. So to be born as a human is rare enough because most of the time you're born in the lower realms. But even among human rebirths, it's more rare to have a life of leisure and endowment, to have this fortunate instant, faith in the teachings of the Tathagata is rarely met with. That's what we mentioned before. That was part of the list that Thupten Lama Tsongkhapa quoted. Living beings who produce bodhicitta are rarely met with. So we talked about that also. Great compassion toward living beings is rarely met with. That was one on the list also. Then beings who renounce such disruptive practices, you could say karmic, you could say dharmic, maric activity, as the karmic obscurations of wounding or criticizing a bodhisattva, demonic activity or acts of Mara, a contemptuous attitude, that means to despise or disparage, and abandoning the holy Dharma are still more rarely met with. Beings who renounce these kinds of practices are rarely met with. So that means those kinds of activities are, they're quite common. And to find people who renounce all of those kinds of things is rarely met with. 8, beings who live as householders, but still are able to accomplish the dharmas with earnestness and are still more rarely met with. So to be a lay person, from the point of view of the Buddhist teachings, the best kind of situation in one of our lives to practice the Dharma is to take ordination. But living as a lay person, one can also accomplish all of these things. But beings who live as householders, lay people, but still are able to accomplish the Dharma with earnestness are still more rarely met with. So in other words, most people who live as householders don't earnestly practice the Dharma, but those of you who are lay people, most of you, well, a couple of ordained in our class, if you practice the Dharma earnestly, you're among those rare things. It's like having a perfect human rebirth. Beings who are truly devoted to the parinirvana of the Tathagata are most rarely met with. I'm not sure what is it. When it says those who are devoted to the parinirvana of the Tathagata, I'm not quite sure what that one means. That's number 9. 10, beings who are devoted to the one vehicle, the ekayana, are most rarely met with. So that means, sort of like talking about the Madhyamaka path as opposed to the lower tenets where you talk about 3 paths and so forth. Ekayana means there's one final vehicle. Everyone will eventually reach enlightenment. Number 11, a bodhisattva should constantly embrace, this is sort of advice, a bodhisattva should constantly embrace the holy Dharma. A bodhisattva must not practice profound reality bereft of skillful means. This one is a quotation that's coming in a few pages in our text. A bodhisattva should not practice profound reality bereft of skillful means. That means that if you are practicing a meditation on emptiness, you should not be devoid of collecting virtuous karma, skill and means, and so forth. Rather, the right practice of a bodhisattva is a union of method and wisdom. And that's coming on page 62. So we're almost, maybe it's very, very close to here. And then the 13th, those beings who enter the lofty grandeur of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are rarely met with, right? People who are actually Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are rarely met with. So these are 13 topics in the Sutra Samuccaya that it talks a lot about. Okay, so compared to the first two texts, what were those texts? Precious Garland and
Ultimate expanse.
yeah, the Dharmadhatu Stotra, the praise of the ultimate expanse. Compared to the first two texts by Nagarjuna, this work, the Sutra Samuccaya, so all three of these were composed by Nagarjuna. The Precious Garland, the praise of Dharmadhatu, and the Sutra Samuccaya. The Sutra Samuccaya is certainly more explicit. Nonetheless, for those stages of the path that remain difficult to comprehend, Shantideva, the great upholder of Master Nagarjuna's tradition, did you know that? Shantideva, was, followed in this same Madhyamaka tradition that Nagarjuna taught, and especially we understand Prasangika point of view. The great upholder of Nagarjuna's tradition, Shantideva, presents them in both his compendium of training and his guide to the Bodhisattva's way. So you know the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, right? How do people translate Bodhisattva Charyavatara? I've seen it translated as the Bodhisattva's handbook. I like that somehow. Sort of like, it's sort of German sounding, is it? Would you say, Nadine, how do you say, is there some German word that sounds like handbook? Is it say Handbuch?
Handbuch, yeah.
Handbuch.
Bodhisattva's Handbuch.
Bodhisattva's Handbook. So yeah, the guided Bodhisattva's way of life, and so forth and so on. So, the story of the origin of that, right? Shantideva was a monk. I think it was in Nalanda, I think. I'm not sure. I think in Nalanda. And he was known as someone in Tibetan, we say Dusumba, which means just had 3 periods of time, sleeping, eating, and defecating. Like he just didn't look like he did anything. Actually, when he was sleeping, he was meditating on the completion stage of highest yoga tantra and so forth. But he was despised and criticized by the other monks. And in order to humiliate him, maybe to get him expelled from the monastery, they asked him to give the weekly teaching lecture. And so they, he actually, I think I may be conflating stories, but I think they made a throne of many, many cushions, like the story of the small path and large path, in the time of the Buddha, to humiliate this one monk they called small path. They built a throne of cushions very high, so he couldn't just step onto it. I think same thing with Shantideva. They had a very high throne without steps, and he just levitated to the top. So they were a bit aghast right at the beginning. And then he said, do you want me to teach you something you've heard before or something that you haven't heard before? Meaning, the usual kind of teachings or something that I compose. And they say, oh yeah, he teaches something new, And he began reciting what was then the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. If you read through the verses, that's what he was reciting to them. And they all started, wow, this guy is heavy, And near the end in the chapter on emptiness, it said that he began to become smaller and smaller and disappeared while the voice continued giving the teachings. When he talked about the great expanse of emptiness and so forth. And near the end of the text or near the end of the lecture, he said that if you want to know the the sources for these teachings, you should consult my compendium of trainings called the Siksha Samuchaya. So we just talked about Nagarjuna's Sutra Samuchaya, right? So Nagarjuna wrote that, the compendium or anthology of sutras. And Shantideva also wrote a text similar to that, which is understood to be a commentary on Nagarjuna's Sutra Samuchaya. He called it the Shiksha Samuchaya. Shiksha means training, or in Tibetan we say Lapa. When we talk about the 3 higher trainings, Lapa Sum, morality, concentration, wisdom, and so forth. So compendium of trainings. That's what Jimpa translated here. In particular, Shantideva presents these elements of the path clearly and most extensively in his compendium of training, which is effectively a meaning commentary on Nagarjuna's compendium of sutras. So if you get a chance to study that text, to read that text, His Holiness taught once, he's probably taught many times, he taught once in Bodh Gaya that I happened to be there for. Very, very inspiring. There were some translations around the turn of the century, not 2000, the 1900s, with these Indologists. I think recently there are some better translations. You can find, I think one is called Anthology of Trainings. I can't remember the name of the person who translated it. Very, very worth getting and studying. This text, the compendium of trainings, Shantideva's text, explains, for example, that one first contemplates the benefit of making this human life meaningful on the basis of contemplating how this life of leisure and opportunity, or this fortunate moment, is of great value and most difficult to find. So in the Sutra Samuchaya, Nagarjuna was giving quotations about the difficulty of finding this fortunate moment, a life of leisure and endowment, you could say. Here he also talks about, Shantideva also mentions in the Siksha Samuchaya, the benefits of making this life meaningful. And because it's of great value and difficult to find. So this, we're talking about, the Lanrim teachings. You might think, who made these things up? They all come from the Mahayana Sutras, as were explained by Nagarjuna, put together, made compendium of these quotations from the sutras, where the Buddha taught these things, and Shantideva's explanation. Next, by cultivating faith in general and a firm faith based on contemplating the qualities of the Mahayana in particular, one generates the aspirational awakening mind. So how do you generate wishing bodhicitta or aspirational bodhicitta? One of the special features is by cultivating faith on the qualities of the Mahayana in particular. By practicing the Mahayana, you become able to lead all beings out of suffering and so forth and so on, all of the great qualities of the Mahayana. So one generates aspirational awakening mind, bodhicitta, and then upholds the vows of engaging in the awakening mind. And then you develop engaging bodhicitta. Not just aspirational wishing bodhicitta. Next, one gives away, protects, purifies, and enhances one's body, material resources, and the roots of virtue. So this is very, very interesting. If you have a chance to get a translation of this Siksha Samuchaya, there's several translations of the Siksha Samuchaya, but I can't find, as Kristen had mentioned, extent now an English translation of the Sutra Samuchaya, although Bhikshu Pasadika supposedly had in a German journal had translated parts of it over many issues of that journal over time. I haven't been able to find that. So here is talking about, so Jeffrey translates this as giving away one's body, enjoyments and roots of virtue, and the modes of maintenance, which Jimpa translates as protection, protects, purification, purifies, and increase of these, or Jimpa says enhancing one's body, material resources, and the roots of virtue. So what this is talking about is, first of all, in the context of generosity, giving up one's body, possessions, and virtues of the three times, right? When we talk about, dedicating, giving away one's body, one's possessions, and virtues of the three times, like in Tonglen, when we talk about Tonglen, what are you giving away to all sentient beings? You imagine your body becoming a wish-fulfilling gem that fulfills the wish of others, whether you're needed as a servant or a friend or a worker or a teacher. I remember Lama Yeshe used to say, when he went to give a course and there was no one in the kitchen, and Lama said, "Oh, I can be in the kitchen. I can help chop the vegetables." He said, you should be able to do whatever is needed for sentient beings with your body, So giving away your body, your possessions, which includes your property and so forth, and your merits of the past, the present, and the future, even the merits that you haven't created yet. Imagine dedicating them, giving them away to sentient beings. So in that context, one has to, next one gives away, in the context of giving, one protects one's body, one protects one's possessions, one protects one's merit, because to be able to give them away, they have to exist, right? So you have to protect your body. That means you have to maintain your body, be healthy. You have to protect your possessions, keep, don't let them be stolen, and so forth. You have to protect your merits by dedicating them, not engaging in activities that the karmic instincts in your mind, your merits would be degenerated. You have to purify, so here, so you have to purify your body, possessions, and merits, and so forth. So what does this mean? So the person who translated the compendium of trainings that I've seen recently, just a couple of years ago, Charles Goodman, you can find on Amazon, Charles Goodman. So he says, giving away to all sentient beings your body, your possessions, and your good, that means your merits of the three times, gained in the past, present, and the future, and protecting, purifying, and enhancing these. Giving away must enhance so how do you enhance giving away? You must enhance the mind of giving. When we talk about giving, so when we talk about enhancing or increasing, so in the Lama Chopa Puja, when we talk about the perfection of generosity, we say, please grant me blessings to enhance the mind of giving without any attachment and so forth. So, but there is a right time and a wrong time. You have to protect the body. You don't want to give the body away when you're not ready. You don't have yet firm bodhicitta or a realization of emptiness. Giving away your body at that time can cause you to lose your aspiration, like the famous story of Shariputra, when asked, when he had first developed bodhicitta, but it was not yet stabilized, Amara came to test him and said, I need someone's right hand to do a ritual came as a Brahmin, and Shariputra thought this was previous life, way before Shariputra was a disciple of Shakyamuni Buddha, right? He was a bodhisattva. He'd entered into the path. And so he cut off his right hand with great pain, and he offered it to this Brahmin, who was an emanation of Mara. You've heard this story before, right? I think I told this story before. And the Brahmin said, "No, ridiculous. How can you give that to me with your left hand? How disrespectful. I'm not taking." And he smashed the hand with a rock. And, and Shariputra at that moment, oh my God, how can I help sentient beings if they act this way? So his bodhicitta degenerated because he had not reached the middling stage of the path of accumulation. And that's mentioned by Shantideva in his Bodhisattva Charyavatara. One verse refers to that. It said, how only the omniscient mind, only a Buddha can know how someone who generated the bodhicitta and gives it up can ever find happiness in the future. He was referring to Shariputra. So you don't want to give away your body at the wrong time. Protecting, before giving it away, the body needs to be protected. And dedicating the roots of virtue purifies. When you purify of these different qualities here, we talked about protecting, purifying, and enhancing. Purifies means preventing oneself from creating non-virtue. So you want to purify your body from creating non-virtue, purify your speech from creating non-virtue, purify your mind from creating non-virtue. You want to engage in terms of body. Purification also includes right livelihood. So that means not in making your livelihood through illicit means, among other things. We talk about the different kinds of wrong livelihood, hinting that someone should give you something and so forth, or so forth. So wrong livelihood would mean like working for a company that is cheating, or is making armaments, or engaged in activity that's against the interests of sentient beings. Enhancing means using the present body and possessions to create causes of more. So using your present body to create karma, to have, again, a human body in the future, to enhance it, to multiply it, so to speak. Using your possessions to create the karma to have possessions in the future. Remember the statement from Nagarjuna, from giving possessions. That means as you reap what you sow. As you give, you'll have in the future possessions. So using your present possessions to enhance your possessions in the future. To create causes of more, dedicating the roots of virtue as well as rejoicing. Okay, so just let me read a little bit further. It is on the basis of such a presentation that Nagarjuna's compendium of sutras should be explained. So what does that mean? It's on the basis of Shantideva's compendium of trainings, which is a commentary on the compendium of sutras of Nagarjuna, that you should explain Nagarjuna's compendium of sutras. Aryadeva, so we talked about here, so Nagarjuna had these three texts that we talked about that explain the general tenor of the path. Shantideva in his Bodhisattva Charyavatara and his compendium of trainings, expanding upon that. Then Aryadeva, who was the student of Nagarjuna, lived with him for many years, who wrote the 400 stanzas. That text also presents the overall body of the profound and vast aspects of the path. So if you get a chance, I don't know if I have here, Ruth Sonam translated what's it called, Paul? How did she translate the title?
I think it was published under two titles. The first title was Yogic Deeds of Bodhisattvas.
Yeah,
And then I think the second title, when it was republished, was 400 stanzas on the yogic deeds of bodhisattvas,
Yeah,
something like that.
the yogic deeds of Buddha. It's actually part of the title in the full title. So the 400, which is quoted many times in our text as we go along, is written by Arya Deva. So in his text, you can find presentation of the profound and vast aspects of the path. It's said that the second chapter of the 400 stanzas, if you get a chance to read the translation, and there are other translations also, especially is a special resource on what we call, when we talk about the three sufferings, suffering of suffering, changeable suffering, pervasive suffering. So Arya Deva explained in great detail changeable suffering. Changeable suffering doesn't mean that when you have pleasure, it eventually turns into suffering alone, like it changes into suffering. It means that even when you have pleasure that's still there, it's the nature of suffering. And so he gives many, many examples in the second chapter of the 400 stanzas, but the whole text covers all of the stages of the path. Furthermore, the presentations on the overall structure of the path in condensed formats found in Bhavaviveka's Essence of the Middle Way, Shantarakshita's Ornament of the Middle Way, and Kamalashila's Stages of Meditation on the Middle Way are all similar. So Bhavaviveka, even though Bhavaviveka was essentially recognized as the founder of the Svatantrika Madhyamaka, right? Not the Prasangika. He was criticized. Buddhapalita, who was explaining Nagarjuna's view from the Prasangika point of view, Bhavaviveka, sort of is recognized as the founder of that slightly lower school called the Svatantrika Madhyamaka. Still, his text explained in sort of encyclopedic way of all of the Mahayana teachings and trainings in his Essence of the Middle Way. Shantarakshita and Kamalashila were the two Indian pundits who went to Tibet and are recognized by the Tibetans, as the propounded, their explanation of the Mahayana path, peerless and so forth. So Shantarakshita wrote Ornament of the Middle Way, and Kamalashila's Stages of Meditation is a text that the Dalai Lama often teaches before giving other teachings. We call it the Gomrim Bhavana Krama. There were 3 different books that he wrote: Bhavana Krama 1, Bhavana Krama 2, Bhavana Krama 2, 3 stages of meditation. They're all translated into English, and they all explain various aspects of the Mahayana path. They're all similar. Therefore, when it comes to the basic framework of the path, all the great upholders of noble Nagarjuna's tradition agree or converge. So, what does he say here? All of the upholders of Nagarjuna's tradition, they all agree on the structure of the path, starting from perfect human rebirth and so forth, all the way up. As for a method that would easily bring forth certainty, ascertainment of these points, how can you easily bring about certainty on these stages of the path? An approach that is most accessible for those on the beginner stage, and this is Thupten Jinpa's translation, says, I have presented an approach for guiding others on the path that is extremely easy to understand in my stages of the path to enlightenment, Lanrim, he wrote the various Lanrims, representing the instructions of glorious Dipankara. Dipankara is the formal name of Atisha, the great saint who came to Tibet and taught the Bodhipratapa Dipam, the lamp of the path to enlightenment, like Lama Zopa's course, Light of the Path, that's been taught for many, many years in the summers, is based on Atisha's text or Dipankara's text. Most learned in the systems of the two great charioteers, Dipankara, Atisha, learned in the system of the profound charioteer of Nagarjuna and the extensive charioteer Asanga, talking about the Bodhisattva's deeds. Thus one can learn from there. But this is not exactly what the text, what the Tibetan says in Lama Tsongkhapa's text. Let's see here. There we go. So Hopkins says, translates, this, the means for readily bestowing conviction in these paths, the various stages, and facilitating a beginner's entry into them can be known from the precepts found in the lamp for the path to enlightenment. He doesn't, the Bodhipratapa Dipam by Atisha, who was skilled in the two systems of the Mahayana, those of Nagarjuna and Asanga. So both of these translations don't quite get to what it says. The Tibetan text does say stages of the path, but Lama Tsongkhapa says the stages of the path were sort of the precept or the, what did he call it? Instruction. He says that stages of the path, which was the instruction of the precept of Dipankara. So one can understand from that, saying that you can either understand Lama Tsongkhapa saying, you can read my Lanrim texts, which are based upon the precepts or the teachings of Dipankara, of Atisha, or as Jeffrey translated, he didn't say stages of the path. Jeffrey just said, you should read the lamp of the path to enlightenment. So I'm going to stop there. I've already gone over a couple minutes. Anyone have questions, doubts? Jennifer.
Just a very quick question, and thank you so much. Was Chandrakirti an advocate of the Madhyamaka Svatantrika or the Madhyamaka Prasangika?
Chandrakirti was Svatantrika, and I can't remember. Paul, do you remember? Was it the Yogacara or the?
I think it was Yogacara, Svatantrika, Madhyamaka. Yeah.
And Kamalashila both?
Yeah, he was his student.
Yeah. So Kamalashila was a student of Chandrakirti. Kamalashila was the one who came, who wrote the Gomrim. He was the one who came and had the debate with Hashan Mahayana. I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, right? Or no? Remember that? You know who Hashan Mahayana was? What is, Violet, what does Hashan mean in Chinese? Hoshan. You have to unmute. Can you unmute?
I have no idea. I'm so sorry.
Hoshan means teacher. Like even in Singapore, when I've come to Singapore, people say, Hoshan. Hoshan Mahayana or Hashan. Don't you say in Chinese?
No.
No? Oh. How do you say teacher? Huh?
老师. 老师.
老师?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Maybe that's, anyway, the Tibetans say Hashan. So there was a Chinese teacher that was prevalent in Tibet at a time when he was saying, oh, you didn't have to practice morality. All of that could be given up. All you had to do is meditate on emptiness. And the king and the other practitioners were very worried that people would get the wrong idea from that. So they requested Kamalashila to come, and there was a famous debate between Kamalashila and Hashan Mahayana, so Mahayana monk. Or maybe Hashan means monk. Maybe that's not the word that I was thinking that meant guru, teacher. So and Kamalashila prevailed in those debates, and that's why it's said that the Tibetan Buddhism took this idea of the gradual awakening rather than instantaneous awakening. You just sit, you meditate on emptiness, and suddenly you're enlightened, and so forth.
Oh, thank you. I think the confusion in my mind was, if he's a proponent of the Svatantrika, then why did Lama Tsongkhapa say he was a great noble upholder of Nagarjuna's tradition?
Yeah, because they all, even the Svatantrika, they're Madhyamakas, so they interpreted Nagarjuna from their point of view. But in terms of the method side,
okay,
and much of the wisdom side, not the final view, but much of the wisdom side, but certainly on the method side that Nagarjuna taught, they were upholders of his system.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul, you look perplexed. You okay?
Yeah, no, I was just trying to see if I had the definition of Hoshang and see if what
Okay.
it meant exactly, but I couldn't find it.
Okay, so thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening, contemplating, and meditating. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Let's put up our dedication prayers. Whoever is the host or co-host. There we go. So remembering that we created virtues today from our motivation at the beginning, due to these virtues, gewadi, that means due to these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all migrators without exception, or you can say and lead each and every migrator into that enlightened state. Then, may the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. So that's the case with most of us. We don't have bodhicitta yet. So that which has not arisen, may it arise and increase. And may that which has arisen, that little bit of bodhicitta that we do have, not diminish, but increase more and more. And long life prayer for Lama Zopa, you who uphold the Muni's moral code, serving as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, meaning Lama Tsongkhapa, who recognizes an emanation of Manjushri, masterfully accomplishing magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Finally, you who are my eyes for viewing the infinite scriptures, you are the supreme gateway for the fortunate traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by love and compassion, all illuminating spiritual friends, please live a long and stable life. So again, thank you for your patience. Look forward to seeing you in the next week. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Thank you very much, Venerable
You're
George.
welcome.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Thank you, Venerable George. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.